All right, American government, let's talk about some of the lower things with the federal courts before we get into more with Supreme Court. We'll touch a little bit about Supreme Court here today, but most of the how the Supreme Court works will be later this week and then into next week too. But we've already talked about some of these things, so let's just kind of go through it real quick at these lower federal courts. Again, the lowest level are the federal district courts. These are the typical trial courts, original jurisdiction for most federal cases. There's 94 federal districts. Typical things we see here: violations for civil rights, employment laws, bankruptcy, false statements, murder, capital murder. But again, most cases are found in the states courts, not necessarily in federal courts. Sometimes you do see grand juries in federal court. Grand juries not used in civil cases. It's for more serious crimes. It can be anywhere from 16 to 23 people. Usually there's a grand jury indictment. We'll talk about that in the future. We talk about civil rights and civil liberties. So just kind of hold on to that idea about grand juries here for now. Remember, in the middle is the appellate courts. This is the middle tier with 13 total appellate courts. Again, if you look here at this map, these are the different circuits that you can see. They're each numbered. Circuit, the First Circuit, Second Circuit, Third Circuit, Fourth Circuit, and so on and so on and so on. You see Ohio there. We're in the Sixth Circuit. You can also kind of see with the little small dotted lines the different districts and stuff. Some states that have more population have more districts. Some states that don't have a lot, there's only smaller. Only one district potentially for like a state like Wyoming. Important thing to know about appellate courts is this is not a retrying of the case, right? If there's a mistake that's made, that's when you see an overturning in the appellate court. The person who files an appeal has to show the original ruling was based off a mistake. You don't get any new evidence, you don't get any new testimony, you don't get to have any new witnesses. Nothing like that exists in the appellate courts. They just review the procedures to see if there was a mistake that was made that may led to a bad decision. Normally this is where the cases end because most cases don't go to the Supreme Court. Some do, obviously, but most of them, vast majority, will not go beyond this level. All right. Just other federal courts here. There's different tax courts, claims courts, international courts. I mean, there's an unending, pretty much. If there's something out there, there's a court typically for it. In the federal courts, it's all very specific. We're not going to go into that too much because we don't need to. All right. Let's talk briefly about the Supreme Court, and then we'll go into more about what the Supreme Court actually does later. So there's 9 justices that serve life-term appointments. There's no formal requirements in the Constitution. There's no age requirement. There's no citizenship requirement. Nothing like that. The Senate Judiciary Committee is important when you have new appointees being reviewed for the paper trail. Typically, the 1st of October, first Monday in October is when the cases begin to be starting to be heard. We'll talk about how they're heard in a little bit. And they usually go until June or July with a few breaks built in here and there. I'll post a video too later this week about when they actually hear some of those cases. But they write opinions, they hear cases. They don't hear cases like a typical court. Hi! As Beckett comes walking in. A lot of the work they do is behind closed doors, right? There's a lot of recent college graduates that clerk for Supreme Court justices. It's a very prestigious thing to be clerking for a Supreme Court justice because there's only 9 of them. So it's a great thing to put on a resume if you're trying to be eventually move up in the federal court systems. So, I mean, Supreme Court, we don't hear too much about them. They're not in the media for a reason. We'll talk about that in the future. But as long as you know that there's 9 of them, they serve life terms, and they're pretty much the highest court in the land, then you're good for now on the Supreme Court. Again, later we'll talk about how they select a case, what are some of these things, how many cases they hear, what the procedures are like, what the briefs are like, and then we'll almost be wrapped up here with